Hello, welcome to Do I Need a Vulnerable Sector Check, a Webinette, a short version of a webinar from the Volunteer Screening Program. My name is Erin Navarro, and I am the Senior Coordinator of Learning and Resources here at Volunteer Alberta. What is the Volunteer Screening Program, or VSP? VSP is a partnership between Volunteer Alberta and the Government of Alberta, and we provide educational resources and tools designed to help nonprofit voluntary sector organizations improve their volunteer screening processes and procedures. We also offer financial opportunities to aid organizations in their volunteer screening efforts, including the Vulnerable Sector Check fee waiver, which there will be more of throughout this presentation, and volunteer screening development grants. So when we say volunteer screening, or just screening, we are very broadly describing the process of defining the relationship between volunteers and organizations. Screening is a big topic that encompasses a lot of subtopics, such as what we're covering today, but these topics all collectively aim to improve the quality and safety of the programs and services in our communities. And lastly, please understand that Volunteer Alberta does not provide legal advice. This webinette and our resources will provide some useful general information, but you should bring any concerns specific to your organization and work to a legal professional. So what is a vulnerable sector check? A vulnerable sector check, or a VSC, is an added search to a police information check, or PIC, but there are different types of police information checks. Different types of police information checks include the Canadian Police Information Check, or CPIC, which searches a national database, the Police Information Portal, which searches indexes of local police databases across Canada, the Justice Online Information Network, which searches Alberta courts databases, as well as local networks. A VSC includes all the information revealed in a PIC, but it is also an additional query to confirm the applicant has not received a record of suspension for sexual offenses. So to get into some important definitions, a vulnerable person is defined as one who, because of their age, either under the age of 18 or over the age of 65, or a disability, mental or physical disability or mental illness, is in a position of dependence on others and is otherwise at greater risk than the general population of being harmed by a person in a position of trust or authority towards them. This definition is based off of the Criminal Records Act definition from section 6.3. There is nuance to this definition since it is so vague, leaving it up to interpretation. So some members who would fit the criteria for this group may not label themselves as vulnerable, and for others it may not be obvious how they fit into this group, but could still be considered vulnerable. Therefore, we encourage you not to use a prescriptive approach. So who should you ask to obtain a VSC? First of all, individuals should be over the age of 18 years old. RCMP detachments and those municipal detachments following their guidelines will not conduct youth vulnerable sector checks under any circumstances. There are some municipal police services that will process youth VSCs, but we would suggest that based on the information VSCs search for, this may be an unnecessary step. To explain further, a VSC is an additional search combined with a PIC, and PICs verify whether an individual has a criminal record, and VSCs expand the search to include any potential record suspensions, formerly known as pardons, for sexual offenses. Youth, defined as individuals who are 12 years of age or older, but under the age of 18, are ineligible for record suspensions, as they can only occur 10 years after the offense date. And as the youngest a person can be charged is 12 years old, a VSC would come back with no records, the same result as a PIC without a VSC. It also depends on the role that the volunteer will be fulfilling. So in their role, they should have unsupervised access to a vulnerable person or group, and someone who is in a significant position of trust or authority is somebody who might be asking to obtain a vulnerable sector check. So to get back into our definitions, a position of trust or authority is defined as a position in which a volunteer has a significant degree of authority or decision-making power over a vulnerable person and unsupervised access to a vulnerable individual. A position of trust may also include the development of a close personal bond between the volunteer and the individual, such as a mentor relationship. A significant level of trust and authority must be inherent within the position and not incidental or occasional. It is a guarantee that in their volunteer role, they will have a significant level of trust and authority. This is the VSP definition based off of the Criminal Records Act definition, which we use to determine approvals for the VSC fee waiver. We added unsupervised access because we consider that a good indicator of the level of risk of a role, and obtaining a VSC is just one way to address and mitigate that level of risk. Note again that it includes a significant level of trust and authority inherent to the role. So when you're thinking if you need to ask your organization's volunteers to obtain a VSC, first check with your insurance provider, your organization's policies, and any pertaining legislation. We also don't need to necessarily ask every volunteer to provide a VSC depending on their role. A VSC is just one way to screen volunteers, and it can depend on the nature of their tasks. And not everyone needs a police information check, let alone a vulnerable sector check. So when we're looking into volunteers providing VSCs, we can look at additional considerations for volunteer screening. So one way we can consider if we should be asking volunteers for a VSC is to see if it balances with the level of risk. If volunteers are working unsupervised with vulnerable populations in a position of trust, then the level of risk increases and may be balanced or mitigated with a VSC. Remember again that a VSC is just one way to screen volunteers, and it could be used as a way to address some of the risks in the role. For example, let's look at a festival volunteer. Some of the risks inherent to the volunteer role is that they will be constantly around children. However, they will also be constantly supervised. To balance that level of risk with the level of screening, an initial application alongside an interview could be enough to balance or mitigate some of those risks. In this case, a vulnerable sector check isn't necessarily needed because first, the volunteer will always be supervised, but through a balanced screening process with application, interview, and constant supervision, the risks of being around children can be mitigated. When we're considering asking volunteers for VSCs, a larger framework that can help guide us is relationship-based screening. Relationship-based screening is defined as screening practices that emphasize human connection, empathy, and mutual understanding. Relationship-based screening goes beyond collecting personal documents, as it welcomes volunteers to participate and be equal players in the volunteer screening process, while organizations create safe and welcoming volunteer programming to promote volunteerism. Within the framework of relationship-based screening, we can also consider that, according to the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, VSCs have been found to be a poor indicator of risk, as past criminal convictions are not correlated with a likelihood to reoffend in a work-related offense. The volunteer screening program also offers a free resource library with screening-related resources. We have multiple resources to assist you with assessing risk, but our risk assessment matrix is a popular tool you can use for each volunteer position to determine the level of necessary screening. And lastly, discussing a criminal record can be invasive for folks who have been systemically targeted by law enforcement. At the beginning of the presentation, I described screening as aiming to improve the quality and safety of the programs and services in our communities, including for the volunteers. All of these considerations can be used to improve upon relationship-based screening, where we can take a curious and open approach, considering the ways we can create a safe space for program participants and volunteers, while doing our best to eliminate barriers to volunteering. So we've gone through a volunteer position, and we've decided that it is necessary to ask the volunteer to obtain a VSC. But what do we do if something is revealed on a vulnerable sector check? We suggest to first have a conversation with your insurance provider if you're unsure of how your organization should respond to potential results in the future, since there is no blanket approach among insurance companies on how to address criminal records. You can also review the Alberta Police Information Check disclosure procedures in order to understand how to read PICs and VSCs. Depending on the municipal detachment, you may just be told that there is a result, which means that there was a match in the system. But the results could be anything from that they called 911, or they were a witness in court, or they were perhaps arrested. If this happens, then you could ask the volunteer what they're willing to disclose. We recommend that you still take a curious and open approach to reading VSCs, but it is good practice to develop policies around how your organization will work with a volunteer if something is revealed. Some organizations have outlines as to how much time needs to pass between an offense and when they start volunteering, while others have additional steps to screening if something is revealed, like having another conversation on top of the initial interview. Again, there is no blanket approach. I mentioned that the volunteer screening program offers a VSC fee waiver, and if this sounds like you may be eligible. First, you need to be a registered nonprofit in Alberta in operation for at least 1 year. Your organization works with a vulnerable population, and you've completed risk assessments, such as the risk assessment matrix, on your volunteer roles within the last 2 years. The volunteer in their role will also have a significant level of trust and unsupervised access to the vulnerable population, and your organization has an active volunteer screening policy. If you are interested in the VSC fee waiver, you can apply today on our VSP website. The Volunteer Screening Program is proud to offer free coaching to nonprofits in Alberta who are interested in learning more about volunteer screening. Or if you'd like to continue the conversation we've had today, you're also welcome to get in contact with us at screening@volunteeralberta.ab.ca. You can access our resources from our resource library through our website as well. So if you ever face difficulties with obtaining a vulnerable sector check, please never hesitate to reach out and ask us your questions. Have a great day.